We've taken a look at how to write a component using Phlex. In this episode, we'll further explore this awesome gem. We have a badge component. For it to be properly rendered, it requires a name and a kind. And its output is a span element with a class that interpolates the badge kind and the inner text that shows the badge name. Now we want to create the badge list in order to show all of our badges. Let's write it from scratch. We start by creating a hard-coded version so we can see the output we expect. We'll have a title and a list of badges. Each individual badge will be rendered inside a list item and will consist of a span element with a class that interpolates the kind and the badge name as the inner text. Let's add a couple of badges and take a look at the output. We can continue by adding a hash with the badge information and iterating over it. And we can remove the hard coding by adding an argument to the initializer and using it on the template. Of course, we now need to pass the hash to the constructor before rendering. So far, nothing new under the sun, but if we look in our template, the span line inside the list item is the same exact line we use in our badge component. We'd like to dry this out so we don't have to change code in 2 or more places every time we want to change our badge. Luckily, this is easy enough to do with Phlex. We can just use our badge component, passing it to the render method. And if we re-render, we can see that the output is the same. Let's change examples. We have a home page, which needs to be rendered as a full HTML page. For this, we can just use the HTML, head and body methods as expected. That was easy enough, but what if we had a second page which also requires this structure? Should we duplicate this code? Well, of course not. Phlex allows us to yield a block of code from one page to another in order to share code. We can implement a layout class with a template method populated with the content that will be replaced across the site. Let's add a couple of markers before and after where the code should go. Finally, we can yield the block to be filled with the page content. In order to render some code from the template, we can pass the content block to the call method, yielding our layout object to it. Now we can call the tag methods on the yielded layout. When we render, we see our layout with the content we passed to the block. This works, but having to add the code to the block is not ideal. What we'd like is to create our page and telling it to use a specific layout. So let's do that. We first remove all the code that will be repeated across all the site from our home page, and we make it inherit from our layout class. When we try rendering it, we see that this doesn't work as expected. None of our layout code is there. This happened because we've overwritten the template method. The first approach we can take to solve this problem is to add a call to super and pass it a block with our page code, which works just fine. But this means we have to add a call to super every time, which is not intuitive. Instead of this, we can remove the super call and, on the layout, use the around template method, which is made just for this. This produces the same output, but is more intuitive to write. And if we want to add a second page, it's just a matter of inheriting from layout and then rendering it. If you are using Rails and you're interested in using Phlex, you can use the Phlex Rails gem. To do so, we first need to add it to the gem file and run bundle install. Next, we can run the Phlex install generator to add some default configuration and templates. Let's see what it created for us. First, we have the application layout, which is meant to be the default layout for all our Phlex pages. We can see that it inherits from application view. We will add some code to this layout in order to see it in action in time. Application view is the base class for all of our views. It's an abstract class where we can add any behavior we want to present in all of our views. This class inherits from application component. Finally, application component is the base class for our components, and it's a Phlex HTML object, just as the ones we've been using on this episode. That's the basic structure that Phlex Rails gives us. Let's now see it in action. We want to create an index page for our users. We can create it by using the Phlex view generator, which receives the class name as an argument, in our case users index view. This generator creates a users index view class with the default template method. Remember that this class is a descendant of Phlex HTML. We can now go to our controller and render it. Note that we don't need to send the call message here, since Rails will take care of rendering it. Let's now browse to the users page. We see that the page has been loaded, but there is no layout. In order to use the application layout as the default layout in our application, we can add this line to the application controller. And now we see the layout. Since this is our index page, we need to have access to our application users. Let's write the code we want to have. To make this code valid, we need to add the users argument to the users index view constructor. Then we assign it, and we can now use it in the template. When we reload, we can see our users listed in the page. Now, it looked like this user item can be used in multiple places in our application, so let's create a component for it. We can use the Phlex component generator with the class name as an argument. This class looks similar to our view, except it inherits from application component. Now we can render our component the same way we learned at the beginning of this episode. We'll pass the user to be rendered the same way we did with our users list in the index page. We can now add the user to the constructor and assign it. And add the call from our page into the template method, changing the calls to the user local variable to the addUser instant variable instead. We will also add some extra text in order to see it change. And when we reload, we can see that it's now rendering the newly created user item component. We've learned to create pages and components using Phlex both inside and outside Rails. I hope it encourages you to try it out on your next project. If you do it, let us know your experience. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.